Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We'll be starting the training very shortly. With waiting for our speaker to log in. He's having connectivity issues. When he's with us, we'll commence the program. Sorry, kindly do bear with us. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay in starting our training today. We sincerely apologize. I want to use this opportunity to once again welcome us all to the Lawyers in Energy Training Series 2.0 in partnership with Centurion Law Group and Brumshi Consultancy. My name is Rakiba Oloko, and I'm your host for today again. Today is the fourth day of the training, and we have with us Mr. Isreal Haye, who will be looking at the topic, who would also speak to us on the topic on how to conduct due diligence investigation in Africa. The same topic as yesterday, but from a different angle, as they'll be taking us through the through conducting due diligence from the contractual matters on acquisition and divestment and compliance and competition law matters. Before we start, I would like to just give a short introduction of who Mr. Isreal Haye is. Mr. Isreal Haye is a partner at the law firm of Commercial and Energy Legal Practice, Candel. He is a director at Aspen Energy Nigeria, that is the Energy Service and Consultancy Group. Prior to his current role at Candel, he served as senior partner, commercial and energy at PAL. Before then, Mr. Isreal Haye worked in-house with Shell, where he at different times provided hand-on legal advice and support to transactions and projects in the upstream sector, midstream, downstream aspects of Shell business in Nigeria. Isreal is a highly sought after energy lawyer, widely reputed for having provided practical and pragmatic solutions and support to clients. Based on his extensive legal and commercial knowledge of the petroleum industry in Nigeria, he was admitted to the Nigerian Bar in 1993 and is a member of the International Bar Association. He holds a bachelor's of law from the University of Jos and is an accredited mediator with the Center for Effective Dispute Resolution, UK, and a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitration, United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Isreal Haye. Welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us today. We know you are very busy, and we know that you just came out from a client meeting to join us in this training. Thank you so much. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Rikiba. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for all the very wonderful work you do on this platform. It's amazing the amount of energy you bring to it, and it is not overstating to say that this would not have happened without your labor of love and all the sacrifice you make. So thank you very much, Rikiba. And to our colleagues who are at the call, I'd like to say a big thank you and welcome to everybody. My apologies for coming in later. Just like Rikiba mentioned, I had a client engagement I could not avoid. And so I had a client engagement I could not avoid. And so here we are. We would try, these conversations started yesterday. Unfortunately, I couldn't join that, so I wouldn't necessarily know what was covered, but I hope that this is either a refresher for those who were here yesterday, or perhaps just another fresh angle even for others. But the subject is primarily conducting due diligence exercises, and I'd like to shoot let me see if I can call up, Rikiba, if you can just let me know whether you can see
I can see your slides, sir. Yeah.
My slides, okay.
Your slides, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Let me see how we're doing with respect to that. Okay, so let's just see how quickly we'll go with that. So So what I'll do is I'll unpack this first. Okay, so I'll unpack the pack. Wanede, you need to mute. Okay, all right, thank you very much. So I'll unpack this first, and then hopefully we can have a conversation quickly on the back of it. But that said, please do engage. I'm sure there is a facility for posting questions. I think the chat functionality should work for that purpose. You can please pose questions. And you know, this is a virtual program, so sometimes it can be quite lonely out here speaking to your screen, especially since we don't necessarily have our videos on. So please practice by making comments on the chat and just letting us know what you think, what you say, and then hopefully we can have a very great conversation going on from here. So due diligence exercises.
Sorry, Mr. Isreal, sorry for cutting you short. I also wanted to inform our audience that they can also be part of the training by raising their hands. That way we can unmute them and they can put on their video. So it makes it more interactive and engaging.
Absolutely true. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Erikiba. That's very important dimension to it. So we're beginning with conducting due diligence in oil and gas transactions. But generally, when you say due diligence exercise, many lawyers have a sense that it is something commercial lawyers or transactional lawyers or lawyers generally are required to do, but what is it? What are the key components or the key attributes? How do we go about them? It's probably not something that we know so much about, because again, it's not necessarily something that is taught in either at the undergraduate level or certainly not at the law school, but it's something you probably have interacted with as for those who went to maybe other sort of further studies. But it is definitely something you encounter in the commercial space, when you come to, so the types of transaction in the oil and gas space, emerging types of transaction in the oil and gas space, and it's not necessarily exhaustive, but we're looking at two types of transaction in the acquisition space, because that's probably what is trending now. So let me clarify that. Things to watch out for and how to conduct the due diligence exercise, typical law and due diligence checklist, critical success factors to conducting an effective or a successful due diligence exercise, what the outcome should be, and potentially just a few thoughts about FCCPC filing procedure. So those are the things we're looking at this afternoon. So let's begin with the spectrum of due diligence. And I've noted this as the spectrum of due diligence because, again, you have to then sort of say to yourself, what am I doing? So on the left, to my left, that's potentially I think to your left, because since we're all looking at the screen. So from the left to the right is representations. And now what is representations? This will be the things the seller tells you, and basically the things you're required to accept. And sometimes to back end or to backstop representations, you have warranties. You said, okay, fine, you warrant that this is going to happen, that this representation is true, and you probably attach some sort of liability to parties in the event that they'll do, but if you stop there, you really haven't conducted the due diligence exercise, because sometimes people think by administering a questionnaire and getting responses per se would be the conduct of a due diligence exercise, and that's probably not what it is. There's a level at which also some things we conduct would maybe fall short of a due diligence exercise, and that's KYC. And for KYC, what you're looking to know is your customer or your client, as the case may be. It tends to be high level and potentially, and sometimes quite restricted in terms of scope. of what you're covering, but it focuses essentially on the entity across the table. Now, if the whole scope of what you're looking at is just stops with the entity you're examining, then you may just be conducting a KYC and not a due diligence exercise. But a due diligence exercise, as we're going to be getting into, is a bit more profound, or it's a little deeper, and it involves a tell and show. And I'll tell you why we describe it as a tell and show, and it's based on a checklist. And what it is that you have designed a checklist of the information you want to both, see, and you want to see, and then you present it, and then you begin to take in the evidence. You take in evidence in response of what that is, and you start to clarify. That is really what a good due diligence exercise looks like, and on the basis of that, you can raise a report to your client as to the outcome of that due diligence exercise. And then, of course, at the very other sort of extreme end of that is investigation. Those tend to be invasive, they tend to be hostile. Again, if you have your brief is to conduct a due diligence exercise, you've got to be sure that you are not crossing over into an investigation, where you are looking. It's almost as I think one of the things that characterizes investigations is just the fact that it tends to be hostile. Again, from a commercial point of view, there's probably no value. It could jeopardize, as a matter of fact, it could jeopardize the entire transaction just by the way the persons that are charged with conducting due diligence is a reasonable and prudent commercial activity that helps you to be able to determine the enterprise value. Now, if you conduct it in a manner that is both invasive and hostile, then you've crossed the line. You're not conducting a due diligence exercise anymore. What you're doing is conducting an investigation, and like we say, that can scuttle the entire transaction, and that's not the result you're probably looking for. Okay, all right. So, moving on very quickly, what are the things that are beginning to emerge as the types of transaction we see in this space now, particularly in the acquisition space? What we were very familiar with prior to the MPN deal, which is still ongoing as far as we're aware, was asset sale. And essentially, what are asset sales? Now, whether it's upstream, and that's probably not true, because these two have been happening rather quietly, truth be told. But asset sales essentially is where what you are divesting, acquiring, or merging, as the case may be, are assets, either licenses, leases, physical assets, platforms, facilities, those kinds of things, where that is what you're selling, essentially based on the principle of buyer beware. You just want to be sure that you're not being sold a dud, so you're going to be conducting a variety of investigations or checks to ensure that it is what you are paying for, and the title passes effectively, and the things that are involved or the things that are necessary for the way you design your checklist, and the place you're going to be focusing on in terms of the evidence you are looking to elicit and check would probably be different. Okay, as opposed to a corporate sale that involves the shares or the shares of an entity, in which case you're buying the entity that owns all the assets. And typically, so for assets, you're looking more at things around title, capacity to travel, to transmit title. You're looking at things like encumbrances. Has this been used as a mortgage, as lien? Is there lien over it? Is it encumbered in any way? Can it pass free of all encumbrances? That would seem to be the focal point of that particular investigation. It's slightly different when you're looking at the sale of an entity, of the company itself, a corporate sale, because then you're looking again at assets and liabilities, and some of which may not have anything to do, with maybe your target asset. Okay, so again, you're looking to see that the liabilities, that it's not a bone that hooks you in the neck, and that they eclipse the asset, and then they render the asset worthless to you at the end of the day. Those are some of the things you're looking to do. So I thought to flag that, and just sort of taking that further, we say, what are the things you're really watching out for, in these types of transactions? What type of transaction it is, you'll have to be prepared to carry out a comprehensive examination of the target with a view to determining whether you are getting the best buy, value for money. And I was trying to avoid telling the story, but I can share it very quickly. In a real sense, the importance of due diligence was brought home to me several years ago. When I worked in house in Shell. This was around the mid 2000s, about 2005, 2006, during the credit boom. And particularly if you work, a regular job, showed that to you. And at the time, we also sort of got sucked into this whole margin loan stuff, I think. And so we had a particular opportunity that looked like it was made in heaven. What was it? The insurance sector regulator had asked insurance companies to recapitalize. So we were approached as a cooperative society. In fact, we were about 3 cooperative societies in the organization at the time. So we were approached at the time to participate in this God-given whatever else. And the point was, we were supposed to, we had the opportunity to, what sort of acquisition is this now? I think it's not an IPO, the pre-IPO type thing. I'm trying to remember the name, and now if anybody can just help me stick it up, but not an IPO, but essentially there was an opportunity to buy, a sort of base level, and then when it is IPO'd, then we'll get out at a premium. And of course, to backstop it, we were supposed to have access to some margin loan, and the buy was huge. People went out as much as 30 million naira, 40 million naira, and I'm talking about around 2005, 2006. So you can imagine what we're talking about, And on the basis of this sort of thing, we went into this transaction. Now, here's the issue: the particular insurance company that approached us, the immediate past MD of that particular insurance company was the new regulator. So the leaders of the cooperative society went to him and said, look, we've been approached by your people to do this transaction, and we really want to know whether, and I've gone back to this to illustrate what I'm talking about, we really want to know what you think about it. And the gentleman simply said, look, I'm the regulator of the industry, so I can't give you an opinion, but listen to me. I'm the immediate past MD of this organization, and I would advise that, I would just say, listen to what the people they are telling you, wink, wink, and so I would say this is about what we did, and on the basis of that, we went out and took out, this was all our due diligence. Of course, what happened was, eventually, we borrowed those kinds of sums. I was out by God knows what, and a lot of people were out by large sums of money and those kinds of amounts. And a few months down the road, they listed, the companies that recapitalized were listed. This particular company that we invested in was not part of the list. So that was the first wave of panic. A couple or so persons jumped out of that particular transaction. I was one of the only 2 people who jumped out of that transaction. because just something told me something wasn't adding up. You know, they said, oh, there was a supplemental list. The supplemental list was published. That company was still not there, and eventually the deal was cancelled, and an emergency substitute was arranged. People lost a lot of money, and people stuck with probably situations they definitely wouldn't have if they hadn't found themselves in that kind of scenario. Now, what were the lessons for me? Due diligence. What should have been the subject of our due diligence? Simply, what are the steps for listing? I mean, for capitalization, what are the steps for listing? You would list those, and then you say, show me the evidence. That's why we say for due diligence, it is tell and show. And I'll illustrate this even a lot more elsewhere. And I hope this little story really just sort of shows this, that we didn't do our due diligence. We stopped at the point of what do you call it now? Representation. And even though we thought it was good representation, it wasn't sufficient. And that created a lot of discomfort for folks. So you want to be sure that what you're getting is the best buy. You want to get the correct and accurate view of the target's assets and liabilities to arrive at the accurate enterprise value. That is really what you're looking out for. Is you want to get a full view of the assets. You want to get a full view of the liabilities, you know, so as to be able to arrive at that. And this sort of gets a little clearer even as we get into this. Now, typically what would happen if it's a large transaction, as you tend to find in the oil and gas industry, that was a significant transaction I described, but not necessarily a large single transaction. But if you were dealing with the large single transaction, then it typically begins with, you set up a data room. In the old days, those will be a physical data room. These days, you tend to get virtual data rooms. So the seller sets up a data room, and then it makes my right of disclosures. Discloses information about the target of the transaction. But here's the key: do not allow yourself or the DD exercise to be driven by the disclosures. That will be the tail wagging the dog. Okay, because you can become easily inundated by useless information. The secret of a good and effective due diligence exercise is to draw up a comprehensive and exhaustive checklist of what you want to see. Remember what I said? To say, so the due diligence you are conducting, so there is no fit-all, no one-size-fit-all due diligence checklist that exists anywhere, if you understand what I mean. There is not. So you have to sit down with a specific transaction, you know, and come up with, you know, and there are generic ones, so you can take that, you know. So for example, you can get a due diligence checklist, you know. If you went and took a due diligence checklist for, say, for buying a telecoms company, you know, you've gotten it wrong from the onset. And those kinds of materials exist, by the way, you know, massive. I mean, so if you practice in an area, those are the types of things you should have well in advance. But if you look at those tables, typically they are so unwieldy, you know, they can be absolutely useless. So what you need to do is to go through them vis-a-vis the specific transaction you're engaged in, and then come up with your own checklist, you know, within it, and then elicit responses to the questions there. And there are situations, there are times when you may need to add or take some things away. So for example, if intellectual property, for example, is not a big issue around my specific transaction, there's no reason why I should have a page or two of responses to intellectual property. I probably would get a couple or so questions around that. So the secret really there is coming up with a good and effective checklist, which would of what you want to see, and then will help you to arrive at what we call enterprise value. Now, I've referred to the expression enterprise value a couple of so times. So what does it mean? Enterprise value equals to assets minus liabilities. So you're getting, you know, all the questions around, you know, title deed, what the value of the asset, and of course you need a variety of persons to be able to arrive at that. So on the one hand, you have the assets, On the other hand, you have the liabilities. You have the assets and the liabilities, and it is when you minus the assets from the liabilities that you will come to what is then the enterprise value, and then you can put in an offer for it. And then when you make that acquisition, you do go into that merger or whatever else it is that you do. Hopefully, you haven't overpaid for it. Unfortunately, a lot of asset transactions, divestments, acquisitions, and the likes that have happened in this country, especially this country, have tended to be overvalued. And again, there are a number of other nuances I probably don't want to be talking about on this forum, but it's not a small service at all. So that's one point to make around there. Now, and around what the critical success factors are to conducting an effective due diligence exercise, and I'll probably be making a second very critical point. Let's go through that very quickly. So we say the design and scope of your checklist is critical. Remember, garbage in, garbage out, ego. And so the second point here is the rule is show me, not tell me. Show me, not tell me. So if I say, for example, do you have all the permits in this area? It's not enough to say yes, we have all the permits. Post photos, photocopies of the permits. Let's see, verify them, and if you need to then go one step further to go to the relevant regulatory agency, of course, having checked with your counterpart, then do so. But the rule, and that's why I put those in capital letters, is show me, not tell me. You just remember that. Now you will have to work with subject matter experts like engineers, finance, tax experts, IT professionals, of course lawyers, etc., depending on the nature and the scope of the transaction you're engaged in. This cannot be overemphasized. It really can't be overemphasized. That particularly for large transactions, don't fall into the trap of saying, oh, it's a legal activity, they throw it at you, and lawyers are struggling to make sense of what they definitely don't know. So if you're asking me to establish the enterprise value, I may be able to make more contributions in the liabilities side of the equation than the asset side of the equation, because the asset side of the equation may require some very technical information or knowledge. I mean, for an oil and gas transaction, you need the input of an economist. You need the input of an ESG expert, that is environment, I think security and governance. You need those kinds of inputs in order to be able to establish the asset column of the exercise. Then the lawyers can then begin to look at, and it's not only the lawyers that look at it. So again, if you talk about ESG, if you talk about what do you call it now? If you talk about communities, if you talk about HR, if you talk about a variety of all the other things you need to be looking at where liabilities can arise, then there are a number of other persons that may be making an input right there. Okay, all right. So I see there are a number of this thing. I'm just turboing through. I'll be done very quickly, and so we can take the conversations and it will flow seamlessly if you don't mind. So thank you very much. So here's a typical list of the kinds of things you probably should be looking at. Now, this is by no means exhaustive, but in some of the exercises I've been engaged in, these are some of the things we see. You are investigating around company compositional instruments. You're checking those. I mean, you're checking with things like what do you call it now? With of course, you are looking at registry, the various registries, notably the Corporate Affairs Commission and the likes of it. Again, don't take anything for granted. It's a checklist. The beauty of checklists is just check, check, check. Don't overanalyze. Go through the checks first, and then you can begin to begin to do your qualitative analysis. So there is a quantitative analysis, there is a qualitative analysis, but be sure to do both. Beginning with the quantitative analysis, where you check, it's there, it's not there, we saw it, we didn't see it, and describe it in those very simple terms, because and no matter, your judgment or perhaps your report is going to be relied on in order to make significant commercial decisions. So you can't take it very lightly. So you're checking for things like title deeds, licenses, leases, permits, to confirm those. Then check for legal proceedings. Are there any pending legal proceedings? Are there any threatened claims? You check for those. And then lands and interests in real estate, particularly when you're talking about what do you call it now? If you're talking about oil and gas transactions, those are very key. Lands and interests in real estate, regulatory compliance, and then of course the financials, tax issues, insurance, human resources, intellectual property, environmental securities and governance, community relations, and on and on. Some of the typical list of those, and around those you can then develop specific questions, and it can be a slightly more robust checklist that you're looking at. And a good DD exercise, these are the things that you should come up with. So it will help you to determine the enterprise value. Remember what we said, that the enterprise value is assets minus liabilities, gives you the enterprise value. And then it will help you to frame your representations and warranties, and to provide indemnities to backstop them, and to set your terms and your conditions. So you see, it's a very scientific approach to doing your legal work effectively, so that again it takes the emotional content out of the drafting aspect of it, where you're probably just arguing unnecessarily. If you've conducted a very good due diligence exercise, the output of the due diligence exercise becomes the input for these things. So you then have a very reasoned approach to how you're framing. You're not then sort of copying and pasting from a previous draft and arguing and falling on your sword. Sometimes you're in the room and lawyers are falling on their sword on issues, and you're like, it's just an ego trip at times, sometimes, to be honest. But if you want to strain off, you want to take out the emotional content of those kinds of engagements and have a very lawyerly conversation, this is what you should do. Conduct a very great due diligence exercise. It will give you, the outcome is your input into determining the enterprise value. That's probably more for the commercial folks, but as a lawyer, then it would inform how you advise the company or the business or whoever you're working with on how to frame their representations, how to frame the warranties, how to frame the indemnities, how to frame the terms and the conditions, which ones are material, which ones are non-material, which ones are boilerplates. I mean, those will apply to anything anyway. So that's it for due diligence. Just before we go over FCCPA, I probably will just pause here and take questions on this, and then we'll close with the FCCPA part of it. Let me see. Thank you very much. Private placement. God bless you. That's what it is. It was a private placement.
There are no questions at the moment, but I have one I want to ask.
Sure.
Can I go ahead?
Okay. Yes, please.
You've given us an idea of what to look out for, what to do when conducting a due diligence. But I think a lot of us want to know, how do we really structure the reports? Because it's one thing for us to conduct a due diligence, a very good one, but it's another thing to put it down and bring it out into a beautiful report, because that's when we would have been seen to have finished or handled our brief.
That's an excellent point, Ricky. But it's a great question, actually. And this wasn't necessarily, I didn't understand it as being part of my brief, so I didn't even put down templates. But again, in a bit of my interaction with the subject, what I found is that there are probably so it depends. I mean, so I've been engaged in one where we've generated multiple reports, for example. multiple reports. So there's a place where we probably have generated a table, and the table will have these heads, which is why I went back to here, and the specific sub questions under them. And then it will have a column that shows the evidence you're looking to see, which is your qualitative and quantitative analysis. And then a column that shows what evidence was furnished, is a continuation of your quantitative analysis. And then, of course, your comments, and your comments can then be your qualitative analysis, where you say, look, this is what we're looking to see, this is what it is, and then you can then run your comments. So sometimes you can create that sort of table. I've used those a lot, particularly when you're dealing in this space where there's a lot of engineers involved. Some can sort of reduce what I've said or represent it in the form of prose, but it's about the same thing. It should state what the head is, what specific issues you're dealing with, what specific issues you're dealing with, and what specific questions you're looking to, evidence you're looking to see, and then what has been shown, and then your comments about that. Now, your comments is the beginning of your qualitative analysis. Now, what do I mean by that? I may have said I want to see, say in our space, I may have said I want to see all the OMLs, just as an example. Okay. Now, maybe, and I don't know, maybe the OMLs that were exhibited to me, or they probably didn't exhibit everything to me, the leases, just as an example, you know. But in this country, it is not entirely easy for people who don't have a lease to say I have a lease. So I can put in my report and say I didn't cite the lease, but I can check whether or not they truly have a lease with DPR. So that's a qualitative analysis. Does that make sense? Yeah. Ricky, I was checking with you to see that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. So that's a qualitative analysis right there. So but don't joke with the quantities. Yeah, i.e., I saw it, I didn't see it, or I didn't see the original, I saw photocopy. Be very factual in your representation, so that people who are making decisions will not say you didn't tell us. You know, but you can at some point, and particularly towards the end of the exercise, then you can start making, because you're probably not going to get 100% of the things you're looking for, but then you can't say, well, look, we may not have seen it, but we can deal with this. And that's where you probably can say, okay, well, they didn't show us this, but this is what their response is, so let us frame a representation. So again, along the lines of these, you know, so a good report can say, this is what we're looking to see, this is what we're furnished, there are gaps, there are no gaps, this is what we think, and maybe to close the gaps we would have a representation, maybe we'll have a warranty, maybe we'll have an indemnity, and maybe we should have a discount in terms of the value, you know. So that is what a report looks like. Of course, the rest is a matter of style. And I've seen it presented as PowerPoint, I've seen it presented as Excel, I've seen it presented as prose, you know, but these are the essential elements. And there are a lot of samples out there. I didn't want to be prescriptive as to style. People would adopt what style works best for them, but the inputs, the components, the essential components are the things I've described. Please shout if you didn't understand what I said, or if there's any aspect of it that doesn't make sense to you, then I would be happy to go over it again, or to explain it another way.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. I don't know if anybody wants Mr. Haye to repeat it, but I have a feeling we all understand what he's saying. Sir, I want to have, this was a question we asked Doctor yesterday, but I want to also get your view as to how do we charge our fees when conducting a due diligence. You know me, I like money.
I know, but you don't give any of that to me, so let me complain to the class now that Rikiba likes money, but she doesn't give it to me. Anyway, you know, charging for transaction, there's no hard and fast rule for it, to be honest with you. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not sure that this is even, I'm not sure, I mean, in all my this, that this is being captured by the so-called scale of charges. But typically the way lawyers charge for our time is the CTR, cost, time, resources, and maybe if I have one advice to give is that it's probably best to not charge, except if your client is willing to, maybe the CTR across the cost, time, resources, but capped or fixed is probably a good approach to this one. But in terms of the cash flow, I would recommend that you take your money on an ongoing basis, because some DD exercise can stretch, and it's a lot of work. It's draining in terms of energy, draining in terms of your resources. You don't want to be out of pocket because maybe somebody agreed to pay you X amount of money after the exercise, after you submitted your report, and then you are dead before you submit your report. So if you make an assessment of the cost, the time, the resources it will take to spend, and then you can charge that on a monthly basis, because, and the reason why that is probably the sensible thing to do is because you probably do not control the due diligence exercise. What makes CTR billing not attractive in Nigeria is, you say you don't want to incentivize the lawyer to drag things out, okay? But in this particular case, you're just one of the actors right there in the middle of it, and you probably don't have that much control as to time. Instead, it is your own time that is being taken. If that is the case, agree a fixed sum that represents the cost, the time, the resources you're employing, and literally charge that on an ongoing basis, and just a month by month basis. Let some revenue be coming in to alleviate your cash flow. Otherwise, you'll be really strung up, and a hungry lawyer, you can be an angry lawyer, and that's when the exercise crosses over from being a due diligence exercise to an investigation.
I was about asking that particular question. I wanted you to help us differentiate the difference between an investigation and a due diligence.
Well, an investigation per se is, like I said, an invasive and a hostile exercise, and it's almost as if you're trying to catch somebody behaving badly, But that's not the intent of a due diligence exercise. Remember that the intent of a due diligence exercise is to establish the enterprise value and to provide you the basis for constructing a reasonable commercial transaction. But the due diligence exercise is really, an investigation by its very nature is, as the Yoruba would say, mumui, I have caught you, and sometimes lawyers don't know when they crossed over into that. You are not EFCC, you are not FIRS, you are not any of those investigative organizations. You shouldn't be conducting an investigation. You should be conducting a due diligence exercise. It's a nuance, but it's an important nuance to demonstrate skill and to enhance your ability to support the business. Okay. Let me see, is there anything we're picking up here? So it says, thank you, Adinka, that's very kind. I appreciate the comment. So Galaxy A50, I'm sure that's their phone, says, please Reki, tell me, is there any particular registration one has to make to be a part of the lawyers in energy sector? Yes, there is a platform, and then I'm sure Rikiba would talk to that at some point. If there is, please tell us procedures apart. And it's a great platform to be part of, by the way, because I don't know that you're an energy lawyer if you're not on that platform, to be honest. Maybe, spoiler alert, it has not only energy lawyers, it has on the platform some of the big energy players generally, so not just energy lawyers. So it's a great forum, great network for anybody that intends to practice in the energy space in Nigeria. And I'm looking forward to Rikiba taking this regional, and so it becomes an African platform. So Rikiba, that's for you.
The platform as the platform. Thank you, Mr. Aye. The platform is now a regional platform. We now have other people that are not only Nigerians on that platform, and we hope to continue to build that network. And Galaxy, okay, Miss Barrister Gilly, yes, you can join the platform. Just go to our website and click on the subscription button. When you do, follow all the process and procedures, and the secretariat will get back to you. Thank you. So over to you, Mr. Aye. I think we should just continue with your presentation, because at the moment we don't have any more questions.
Okay. All right, just a couple more slides really that add-ons here. The focus was really what I already dealt with. But so now there is the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Act, and its mandate essentially is to ensure, is to oversee or supervise large merger transactions, okay, and to ensure that no entity post-merger and or acquisition becomes too dominant as to disallow or dissuade competition within the market. That's really what it is. It's early days. It's a relatively new entity, and it's feeling its way, as it were. It has, as part of its toolkit, the pre-notification, which is about 2 weeks before formal notification, and a formal notification of the FCCPC. Essentially, when you're contemplating, or if you're contemplating a merger and or acquisition, you know, there's an expectation that you would engage this entity before you close the deal. Okay. Now, the filing requirements for formal notification are it includes you know, there's a form, as you would expect, which are form 1 or 2, and I'll explain that in a second, which you're required to fill, and then information to be provided in sections and paragraphs, executed declaration by authorized signatories, annexing relevant documents, signed by 1 or 2 authorized personnel, and then you submit. Some of the documents that you can submit include an original copy of Form 1, which requires with required copies as may be requested by the FCCPC. Then relevant supporting documents to be attached to Form 1. Now there's a Form 1 and I think a Form 2, because Form 1 is like a stage 1 essentially, which will then help them to determine whether this is a simple merger or acquisition, or if it's a complex one, and then it tends to be a bit more, how do I say, it's a bit more involving the next phase. And those would include audited financial statements for the past 3 years as applicable to the companies that are engaged, that are contemplating the transaction, 5 years financial projection of the companies, and then the form is required to be filed within business days hours electronically on the FCCPC website, or by submitting hard copies of the documents to the FCCP physical address. So the phase 1 notification and review process involves, like we say, submission of merger notification, which we already talked about, publication of notice of merger, receipt of third-party submissions on merger, initial investigation, market testing, information gathering by the FCCPC as an activity they engage in, the state of play meeting or call, and then of course parties' response to the issue paper, and then of course the issues meeting, and then the FCCPC generates a report. Now, if this is not considered to be to constitute a threat to the market space, then it probably ends here. Otherwise, you can get onto a phase 2, you know, which is then goes on with the state of play meeting, statement of objection issued by the FCCPC, parties' written response to the statement of objections, and then invitations for hearing of third-party submissions, oral proceedings in relation to statements of objections and parties' written response, and the issuance of Form 3, decision of FCCPC. I think this should have been broken down. Disposition of notification process in phase 2 is basically, and then the publication of the reasoned decision in a gazette to third party is what closes that process, as it were. Right. Okay, so that is just an outline of that sort of filing process, as was stated. Like I said, it's relatively new, particularly for the oil and gas space. The initial response was to resist it and to say that there is the ministerial consent requirement, and that this was an overlay, one too many overlays. And so I don't know, some people may have a lot of experience in it. I don't. I'm engaged in one as we speak. But it's early days, and I probably can't say more than what I've said on the subject. But I think one thing that is settled is that any kind of acquisition, assets, share, whatever else, falls under the jurisdiction of the FCCPC, and everyone is gearing up to comply with the filing process and procedure. And in the days to come, we'll learn a bit more about how that system works. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful in some way.
Thank you, Mr. Haye. Joseph Omoba has a question for you here.
Sure.
He's saying, arriving at the EV, what's the meaning of an EV?
Enterprise value.
Okay. Arising at the enterprise value of the company includes input of other non-legal experts. He's asking, is it relevant for a legal due diligence to include a portion analyzing the EV?
So it really depends, and that's a good question, Joseph. Thanks for flashing. So it really depends on what the transaction is, what the scope is, and what you have been called to do. But really and truly, unless it's a really small transaction, and which is why I showed you a spectrum of it, unless it's a really small transaction where the people are saying, look, we're willing to take all kinds of other risks, just check the legal issues for us, then that's a light, it's not like coffee light, right? That's really a light exercise, but if we're talking about major transactions, complex transactions within our industry, it's really not a legal due diligence. It's a due diligence exercise where the legal issues are a component or a dimension of it. You're doing this in association with other people, and you cannot, overall, unless you're doing just searches, at some point, what you're describing is probably just like searches, really, not a due diligence exercise. But a due diligence exercise, by its very nature, is designed to arrive at an enterprise value. And that's probably what many lawyers who interact with this phrase, I would hazard a guess and say, a good part of this room today may not have thought about it in that sense. We think of it in terms of, checks, but if you want to wrap your head around it, you want to wrap your head around it and say, look, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? It is that at the end of it, your client wants to get a fair and accurate assessment of the enterprise value of the target, which equation is asset minus liabilities. Remember that you are the custodian of the liabilities. Even what the other investigators are doing, they'll send to you, and you make, that sort of, you bring it all together and say, well, look, this is what the liabilities looks like. So for example, and this is just use the simplest. If we were to use a very simple analogy, just to understand the concept. If the target, for example, is say how do I put it? If the target is say a soft drinks manufacturing company. Okay. Now, what are the assets? The assets will be the plants and machinery. Okay. There will be the licenses. There will be maybe the intellectual property, assuming they have any specific inventions or formula that they have, protected by some form of intellectual property. Those kinds of things. Okay. Those will be some of the ways in which we arrive at the asset. Now, what about the liabilities? Okay. Those would be maybe, assuming the plants and machineries were bought on credit. Okay, or you used a loan facility to acquire that. Okay, what would you do and what would you potentially do with that in your what would you potentially do with that? You discount it, is that not so? So sometimes when you get this sort of thing, you discount it from the enterprise value. So if I arrive at a number here to represent that, now if the value, if all the calculations I do up here brings me to say ~1 billion naira, okay, but I say, look, there is this pending facility, I'm acquiring this liability, this, that, whatever else, and it probably comes to about 200 million, so already your EV is looking like 800 million, and then you check a few other things. So that's the quantification aspect of it, yeah, and the likes of it. Otherwise, if I pay ~1 billion, if I pay ~1 billion naira for that asset, or my client pays ~1 billion naira for that asset, and then goes on to pay another 200 million naira in the form of liabilities, what is the true cost of that acquisition? That's 1.2 billion. Okay. What's the life cycle value? And the likes of it. Because if by the time I'm done paying this, the machinery have worn out, I need to buy a new one. So you can have a situation where from the onset, you didn't do your valuation properly, and then you are always playing catch up. So those are some of the thoughts around it, for example.
Do we still have anybody that wants to ask Mr. Haye any question?
Nobody wants to unmute their mic and open their video, and so that we would interact. But was this beneficial in any way? Was this helpful in any way?
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
outside of questions, it would be nice to also get. No, Rikiba, I'm asking the class. I'm hoping that somebody would be able to say, look, just by way of feedback to both Rikiba, who is organizing this, and myself, to say, look, this is useful, or what can we add to make it even more decent? All right, Ibrahim.
Yes, sir, this is really, really educative, and I think part of the concern I have in mind is looking at the energy sector. I'm just wondering whether an individual lawyer that is working in a small law firm or managing a small law firm will be able to tap into the potentials in this energy sector. I have this feeling as if it's the big law firms, Templars, and the rest that perhaps will be approached by these power companies whenever this kind of transaction comes up. So I would be interested, sir, if you would share with us some of the potentials, especially for the small boys, upcoming lawyers, upcoming law firms, that some of these banks, some of these power companies cannot reach out to this kind of transactions. That's my area of concern.
Okay. All right, Ibrahim Mohammed Sagagi. Great question. even we've considered the subject of due diligence from the perspective of the oil and gas industry, and probably not entirely exhaustively, but it is an activity. Sorry about that. It's an activity that I'm trying to get this to expand. Okay. All right. Yeah. So it's an activity that it's a discipline that you find across all the commercial space. Okay. Sometimes the transactions that we are presented with maybe may not require a full-fledged. Again, you're not going to use a sledgehammer to swat a fly, but look, at the end of the day, hopefully you can you can scope it rightly in order to be able to you can scope it appropriately in order to be able to meet the needs of your client. But to your question, whether there is room for whether there's room for you to for room for the smaller lawyers, that will continue to be an issue anywhere, to be honest with you. You've got to have a strategy. Look, at the end of the day, capacity counts for clients, and so if you're looking to do big transactions, maybe people should not continue to exist in their corner shops, except you just really want to practice as a barrister. But if you want to get into commercial space, then you must continue to think about how to merge your shops, and to progressively consider opening up, to demonstrate capacity to the market. So that's one way. And there are many ways in which you can access key decision makers and demonstrate those sort of things to them, hopefully, as you go along. But let me say this, that as the oil industry itself is going through a transition within Nigeria, with the divestments, with marginal fields, with the advent of small fields and less, we're beginning to see the emergence of smaller players, and those smaller players may then be maybe looking for niche practices and firms and persons in those sort of pockets of expertise to support them. So in a sense, even the big firms have to rethink their strategy in this market. And you're taking me outside of the strict whatever else, because sometimes their overheads and the entire layout may not even justify the kind of value they deliver to the market. So it depends on what your strategy to the market is. But yes, there will be space for everybody eventually. But it's never easy for anybody. The big guys you're saying don't even get it on a platter of gold. They have to position themselves. They have to ask for it. They have to reach for it always. There's Olujumobi Orioye.
Yes, thank you. I must first appreciate your delivery. It's quite educative, and probably that's the reason why many of us didn't have much question. And previous lectures have actually covered some of the things which we would have bombarded with you with. The organizers have done justice to a lot of questions that went up on our minds. But something came
just 1 second, if you don't mind. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm locking somebody outside. I need to get a door for someone. Okay. I apologize. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So, so I have my question is about the bureaucracy of getting information on behalf of clients, especially from government agencies. Like you want to get information about some oil assets, you go to the relevant authorities. How easy is it to get information on oil assets from government agencies?
Okay, I mean, great question. Historically, and probably up to this moment, I wouldn't say it is, to be honest with you. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is, you know. And that's because it's the Petroleum Industry Act that introduced a register of interests, both a register of interest and a register of assets. You know, so the whole so the equivalent of the registry, we didn't have that, you know, in the old dispensation. Now there is, but in terms of practicalizing it, I don't know that has. I mean, the regulatory agencies themselves are still trying to settle down, and so that continues to be an issue. Because it would not even look, the very existence, you know, there is the very existence of licenses, leases, the issuance of permits and the likes of it. There wasn't really a register you can go and query and get a response, you know. So that didn't exist. Now in law it exists. In practice it needs to be put in place, and then a process needs to be published on how you can, because you know, if you will, the principles of access to information have been embedded within the law, as it were. So you should be able to query those kinds of registers, even just as an outsider, and get almost the way you go to the lands registry and check, you know, for the status of a particular land at the registry. That is not the case yet. It's evolving. So that's one thing to note. Normally, or in the kind of old days to now, the way you do is that you approach and then you get some sort of response from the relevant agency to say, yes, this is the case, or no, that's not the case. But from the point of view of cooking up a transaction, part of the restriction is that, or part of the limitation is that you honestly don't even want to start making enquiries. You don't want to blow it, you know, before you are ready to. So maybe that's the aspect of your due diligence exercise you reserve until the very end, you know. So you have to make some sort of judgment prior to checking, you know, to say, okay, look, they've shown us XYZ, but you know, maybe when the transaction is ripe for, you know, whatever else, then with the permission of the counterparty, you can then go and check with the regulatory agency. But you're not going to jump in. And typically, sometimes the way to do so is to ask the license holder or the leaseholder to write the letter, in which case they would say, look, we're contemplating this kind of transaction, can you please confirm in writing so and so position? And then you get that sort of written assurance of what the position is. I don't know if that answers your question.
Very well, thank you very much. My question has been answered.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Aye.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and it was very insightful. By way of recommendation, I know you asked for a recommendation. I was thinking it would be good for subsequent presentations to have a demo, or what would I call that now? A demo of some sort of what he did the exercise to look like, or like he did the report like Rakiba had asked at the start, so that we can sort of see as the lecture is going on what it looks like. So if you could redact maybe information of an existing client that you've done DD for and just show us what that process or what the final report looks like, then it will also help with visualizing the exercise or simulating it. Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. That was very useful. Noted. All right, Rikiba, looks like the issues are exhausted. Your line is muted.
Question, for the lack, I've unmuted myself, sir.
Sure.
Hello, sir. Yeah, I muted when the question and answer session was going on.
Sure.
For the lack of any further questions, this is where we will draw the curtain of another exciting session of the Lawyers in Energy training. I would like to use this medium to say a big thank you to our Oga Patapata editor, Mr. Isreal Haye, for creating our time out of his very busy schedule to educate us on today's topic. We are really grateful, sir. Thank you so much. And to our partners for making this training possible. We say a big thank you to Centurion Law Group and Brumshi Consultancy. And to you, our participants, thank you for staying tuned. We started this training on Monday, and you've all been with us from Monday till today. The training will continue tomorrow, and next week we hope to end by Thursday. Although we will not have any training on Monday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday because they are public holidays. But we'll resume the training tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I want to also inform you that you can rewatch this episode and any other episodes of our previous recording on our YouTube channel at Lawyers in Energy Network. And please remember to subscribe to our channel. Also know that all the presentations that have been done so far will be sent to your registered email addresses. I have people send me messages and call me that they don't receive presentations. Every day at the end of this each session, we send out a reminder of the next training for the next day. In that reminder, there are 2 links in the email. One link is for the video recording, and the second link is for the Google Drive, in which all the presentations are stored. When you click on those links, it will take you to the drive where all the documentations are, the presentations are stored. Then you have 4 presentations in the presentation as at today. And on our YouTube channel, you have 4 videos that have been uploaded. That is for day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. So you don't miss out on anything. And also, people have been asking on how to join the network as a member. Like I said earlier, you can go to our website on www.lawyersInEnergyNetwork.com. I will type this in the chat box for everyone to see. When you get to the website, at the top page of the website, there is a subscription button. You can click on that subscription button and follow the process and procedure. It's a form, so you fill it and make your payment. For those registering in Naira, it's just 10,000 Naira. And for those registering in dollars, it is $20. For those registering in dollars, we don't have a Paystack link yet, so you have to do your transfer to the account on the website. Like I said again, the training continues tomorrow, but this time at 11 p.m. We couldn't do today's training by 11 because, like you heard earlier, our Mr. Haye had a client meeting that he couldn't get out of, and he promised us he was going to finish as at 12, and that was why this training started by 12. But tomorrow we are reverting back to our original time at 11, and there's going to be another interesting personality coming on board. She's a partner of a law firm and is into energy transactions. I'm sure we are going to learn a lot of things from her. My name still remains Rakiba Oloko. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Lawyers in Energy Network. See you tomorrow, and bye for now. Bye.
All right. Have a great